So if you didn't catch it already, my name is Evelyn Barajas Perez. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator with ECOSLO. Now, ECOSLO is the Environmental Center of San Luis Obispo County. We are a local nonprofit that focuses on education, advocacy, and taking action to protect our beautiful Central Coast environment. We run many programs, including beach cleanups, tree plantings, docent-led hikes, green drinks, and SLO County Green Business Program. This program today is made possible with the support from SLO County Integrated Waste Management Authority, also known as IWMA. The IWMA is a public agency that educates our community about garbage and recycling, manages hazardous waste disposal programs, and passes resource management ordinances. They have a fantastic website with online resources, including waste management, outreach, and educational materials for schools, businesses, and residents. If you are ever unsure on how to dispose of an item, you can type it into the IWMA website. It will tell you exactly what to do with it. Sign up for their newsletters to get interesting info and tips on how to reduce your waste. Be sure to check out their website and social media. Now, today we have a wonderful guest speaker, Mike DeMillo. Mike is an education program coordinator for San Luis Obispo County Integrated Waste Management Authority. This is Mike's 26th year, I believe, of providing educational programs in solid waste, recycling, and other natural resource related topics. Mike and his staff provide over 1,000 presentations and field trips each year to children and adults throughout the county. Mike graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo with a degree in natural resources management and has lived in SLO since 1978. We have a fantastic turnout today, so make sure that everyone can hear our speaker. Make sure to mute yourself if you're not already muted, and we will afterward have some Q&A time. So make sure to put all those questions in the chat, and I promise we'll get to them at the end. And with that, thank you for joining ECOSLO and IWMA tonight, and I will hand it over to Mike.
All right, thank you for that nice
you're muted, or
I'm not showing, you're not hearing me?
Can you speak now?
Test,
yes.
test.
Yes, okay, it was my end, we're good.
Okay, I didn't think I was muted. So, all right, thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction, Evelyn. So tonight I've got lots of images to show you and share in our Curb to Compost program. I'll make it relatively fast paced. So if you're not so interested in one or two images, hopefully the next few images after that, you will be interested. We'll do all the questions and conversation at the end so I can kind of go through our program seamlessly. I probably will take 30 to 35 minutes to go through all of the images, and would be very thrilled to talk with you after the program for as long as you would like to about the content of tonight's program. So we also have some video in there. I've left the video clips relatively short because I know on your end they may buffer or not come out as smoothly as we would like to. So we'll keep the video clips relatively short. So with that, I'm going to go to screen share and bring up our images. And Evelyn, can you confirm for me that everything's looking full screen for you?
Yes, I can hear. I can see everything.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so here we go. Curb to Compost. Evelyn, you did such a great job of explaining what IWMA is. I'll won't say much about it because you did such a terrific job. I'll simply add that my niche with IWMA is school and public education. And during COVID, of course, we changed to mostly virtual or online education. And our team now is making its way back out to schools and public venues, which is really terrific. But we still do lots of virtual education programs as well. So tonight, I'd like to cover some real basic things. What are we talking about when we use the term organics? The importance of compost and composting, what are digesters and how they work, and finally, how you can participate in organics programs where you live, no matter what part of San Luis Obispo County you're from. So I want to start, though, by talking about how much stuff we throw away in San Luis Obispo County. We have three main landfills: Cold Canyon, which is by the San Luis Obispo Airport; Chicago Grade Landfill, which is in Templeton; and Paso Robles Landfill, which is 8 miles east of Paso Robles out on Highway 46. At the end of a typical day, well over 1,000 tons of municipal solid waste is dumped at these landfills. And unfortunately, there are a lot of organic content going into the landfills. And when I say organic content, I'm usually talking about green waste and food waste. And one of the issues with this is that there are lots of organisms that would like to use the landfill as a buffet, particularly for the food waste. And that would violate federal, state, and county laws to allow animals getting into our landfills for feeding. And in fact, at one landfill, there's a full-time falconer just to keep gulls out of the landfill facility. So the other issue that we have with food waste going into landfills is that the food waste breaks down in an environment without oxygen, in an anaerobic decomposition. And the result is that landfill gases are released, and over 90% of landfill gases are comprised of carbon dioxide and methane. So now that creates a management issue at our landfills. So by law, all landfills today have to have a gas recovery system to pull these gases out of the landfill before going into the atmosphere. But no landfill is going to do that 100%. So our goal in California is to begin keeping organics out of landfills. The other issue is after our gas recovery systems pull the gas out of the landfill, then what are you going to do with it? So, for example, at the Cold Canyon landfill, they bring the gases to a facility where they actually turn it into electricity, which is a success story in itself, but that's not the method that the state of California wants us to be using. And we'll talk more about that later. So the takeaway here is landfills are not built to be or meant to be compost piles, and we want to keep green waste and food waste out of the landfill. So speaking of that, organic. So when we use the term, as I said previously, we're talking about food waste and green waste. And the reason I bring this up is there are occasions when people think that when we say organics, we're just talking about certified organic food, but that's not the case. We'll compost any green waste or food waste, whether it's certified organic or not. So how much organics are going into California landfills? Well, according to CalRecycle, over 31% of what's going into our landfills is organic content. And also, I should mention that by their definition, wood and paper is organic content as well. So 31%, and that's by weight, not by volume. So we also throw away millions of tons of food waste each year in California. One of our other goals is to recover some of that, at least the edible portion, and make sure it stays out of the landfill. So the driving force in our county and every county in California in this new goal of keeping organics out of landfills is Senate Bill 1383. And it's a very wide-reaching piece of legislation, and every city is mandated to comply with it. And one of the challenges, I'd say, is that it's an unfunded mandate to a large degree. And so if your garbage rates are going up in the next number of months, this would be a very likely reason why. SB 1383 says that all businesses and residents are going to be provided an organics collection container so that we can get those organics into a composting facility instead of a landfill. And by 2025, the goal is to reduce the amount of landfilled organics by 70% or 75%, excuse me. And CalRecycle, the California Department of Resources, Recycling and Recovery, is the state agency that monitors and oversees SB 1383. All right, so I mentioned earlier, edible food recovery. So part of SB 1383 challenges us to pull out a certain amount of edible food and make sure that it goes to food banks and other places, potentially even feeding animals. And that would be a higher and better use than sending it to a landfill and frankly, even composting it. So there's a lot that we need to do to be compliant with SB 1383. In addition to that, the estimate is that we'll need 50 to 100 new or expanded compost facilities throughout California. Frankly, I think it's going to be over 100, considering we have 58 counties and there's a lot of materials to recover. And that means that they have to go to a legitimate facility for composting. So there's quite a lot of infrastructure that's going to have to be created to accommodate all the organics that are going to be collected. So speaking of infrastructure, we have two people in our team who visit restaurants, grocery stores, wholesale food producers, restaurants, lots of hotels, lots of other businesses to gather as much compost or food waste as possible to turn into compost. Currently, we have 950 or close to 1,000 businesses on the food program in our county, and that number is growing each week. So this is the kind of thing that we're trying to make sure doesn't go into a landfill. And I want to point out that this picture was taken during our pilot program, and notice the container is yellow. Today, via SB 1383, all containers for organics need to be green. So we shouldn't be seeing any of these yellow containers out anymore. One of the other things I wanted to point out is there's not only food waste at restaurants on people's plates after a meal, but there is what we call pre-consumer food waste in the kitchen. So we're even working to recover those materials as well. So let's transition now to where some of these materials are going to go in terms of food waste and green waste. There is a composting facility in North County near Creston, North County Compost, and they take the materials, grind it, turn it into windrows, and then a machine called a scarab goes over the windrow and turns the pile. It adds air into it while it's turning it, and that helps make the process go a little bit quicker. Typically in a windrow compost system like this, the material might be there for 90 to 120 days until it's ready for final screening and shipping to an end user. So anyway, there's windrow composting, and then the kind of composting we're going to talk about more tonight is anaerobic digestion. And one isn't necessarily better than the other. They're just two different ways of helping solving a materials issue. So I'd like to transition now to our anaerobic digester field trip and talk about that and how they take green waste and food waste and turn it into electricity and a compost product. If you're not familiar with the location of this facility, it's right next to the San Luis Obispo Airport, and you can see that in the background. This was built in 2018 at a cost of about $25 million. I imagine with the rapid inflation we've had since then, it would cost a lot more than that today if we were going to replicate it. So just a little area orientation here. The receiving hall is where the trucks come in with all the organic content in it. This is the actual digester vessel itself, and we'll look at that before it was completely built so you can see what it looks like inside. We've got a gas collection, biogas collection here. This is where the energy is produced off on the left side. And then finally, a curing hall, or a place where the finished compost is placed to cure before it's shipped out to an end user. So we'll visit most of these places on our tour of the facility. So let's talk about what an anaerobic digester is actually. And it's really very simple. It's a big steel container that we load food waste and green waste into, leave it in there for a while. There's very little or no oxygen in the digester. And then after a couple of weeks, we get out of the other end biogas, which is converted to electricity. and solids, which is made into compost. And the real stars of the show here are the organisms working in the digester that break things down and create all of the biogases inside the vessel. And so these things work, and they're kept in a environmental condition that allows them to propagate and keep the population where they need to be to keep the composting process constant. So how do the organisms get to the our green waste and food waste get to the digester? This is going back to infrastructure. When we collect food waste in the county, if it's just food waste being collected, you typically need a truck specifically designed to collect food waste because there's a lot of liquid content which would leak out of a typical truck and be all over the highway and possibly create stormwater runoff pollution issues. So this is one of the trucks that was first purchased to collect just food waste. It runs on propane, and those storage tanks are up on top of the truck itself. Again, going back, here's our green color coding for organics. This is the Madonna Inn, and they even created with the green lines here an area just for the green carts. So most restaurants in our county today, or hopefully most of them, have these green carts for placing all their food waste in. And of course, most residents have a green cart of varying sizes to put their organic content in as well. Well, food waste is really heavy. And if you're collecting a 64-gallon container of food waste or even larger, it's going to be so heavy that you need hydraulics that are a little bit stronger maybe than the typical hydraulics to lift a cart. On average, food waste will weigh 8 to 12 pounds per cubic foot. And that's heavier than, say, municipal solid waste. So here's a wonderful picture of what some of the materials look like that are collected from restaurants. And remember, this is stuff that used to be going into the landfill. So I'm happy to say we're capturing this material and sending it somewhere where we can actually make a compost product from it. Now, there are times when we have trucks coming into the digester that aren't specific food waste trucks. And typically that means that they're picking up mostly green waste with simply a small fraction of food waste. And then at an instance, it doesn't need that specialized truck that I showed you earlier. By the late afternoon or mid-afternoon each day, the trucks typically are lined up to get into the digester receiving hall, and that's where they dump all the material onto a concrete floor. So the truck backs up into the hall and simply dumps a big pile on the concrete floor, and then a front end loader is going to push it into a more compact pile. So we'll take a look at our first video of the day and of the evening. And I want you to pay attention to what the individual pulls out of the pile. And it's a category that we call contamination. And unfortunately, things like what you're looking at right now are all items that were in green carts and went into our collection trucks for organics. And it's really imperative that these things be pulled out before they go through the composting process, because they're not really appropriate for that. So we'll try our video here. All right, so you saw there's always somebody out there who has to go through as to the best of their ability and look to pick out any contamination that may have come out of the truck. The next part of the process is to break materials down into pieces that are smaller than 2 inches. So this is called the shredder, and the yellow arrow that you see is pointing at these blades which rotate inward. By the way, I took this picture before the facility actually opened, so that's why everything is so clean there on top of the blades. After the material is shredded, it goes on this upward conveyor belt to the next stop. And then where you see the red arrow is a cross belt magnet. And the idea here is if, for example, from a restaurant, there were any spoons or forks or metal objects that got into the food waste, they would be able to pull it out pretty early in the process, which is really helpful. I'd like to show you a video now of the shredder in action after the facility opened. All right, so the shredder now has everything in theory into pieces that are 2 inches or smaller. And then the next step in the process is going through the star screen. And this is another level of separation. You notice the pile on the left is finer and the pile on the right is a little bit larger. That pile on the right we call overs, and that's going to go back into the shredder and be shred again so that it can be put into a smaller size component. Here's the shredder at work. Or the star screen, excuse me. All right, after the material is shredded and screened, it's put into a final pile where it's going to be picked up through an automated system and fed into the digester. And so the yellow claw that you see up on top is operated automatically. It knows when the digester is hungry. It may feed it 1,000 pounds every 15 or 20 minutes. Nobody has to be at the plant to do that, and it works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we've got a little video clip to show you the feeding process in action. Here we go. Whoops, excuse me for that. All right, so now we're on the final conveyor to get this material outside. There's Joe, the plant manager, and this is what's going to go into the digester just a few seconds after it makes its way all the way up this conveyor up to the top. So I wanted to show you what the digester vessel actually looks like during construction, because once they finished it, you can't really see this part of the structure. This tube is 30 feet in diameter and 200 feet long. This small hole where the red arrow is where the shredded up material is going to be fed into the digester. And you notice there's a ladder down on the bottom with a relatively large opening there. We're going to take a look inside that opening because once it was sealed up, they probably will never open that vessel up again. And so we've got the opportunity here to see what it looks like before they actually started using it. I'd also like to point out that the material inside the digester is kept at 131 degrees Fahrenheit, and it stays in there for about 14 days until it comes out the other end of the digester vessel. So here's what it looks like today. There's a sheath over it, and there's all kinds of other structures. So that's why I wanted to show you what it actually looks like internally. So the material that we looked at on the conveyor belt goes up to the very top and then drops down into that hole that I showed you in the previous slide and into the digester itself. And now this is what the vessel looked like before any food waste was put into it. There are some columns there that provide heat to keep things at 131 degrees. And then there's a structure called an agitator, or several of them throughout the digester, that turn and rotate And this rotating arm actually helps the gases bubble up to the top of the digester where they can be more easily captured. So the next slide I want to show you is through an observation hole at the very top of the digester, looking down into the digester. And we had to film this with a phone pressed up against a piece of dark glass. And since it's so dark inside, the light that you'll see is just coming from a flashlight. So very challenging to shoot. But what you'll see here, if you pay attention carefully, is the gas bubbles rising to the top. And then on the left, you'll see the agitator that we saw previously coming up to the top as well.
I can move the like wherever you like.
Yeah, how about we just move it around a little bit just to show, so you can see it moving. Can you show the top and angle it up?
There should be a paddle. You see the
Oh
material.
yeah. That's
All right, so that is what it looks like inside the digester. This is the structure where the gases go, and then the dome structure. And then the wood planks that you see are a structure called a biofilter. This is filled with wood chips from top to bottom, and air that is taken out of the finishing hall is pumped in to this biofilter, which has wet wood chips in it. In fact, you can actually see, I think, some sprinklers on right now that are wetting the filter material. And that's how we make sure that none of the air that wouldn't smell so good is getting out into the environment. Also, I wanted to point out that at the top of the digester, there are pressure relief valves in the event that the pressure was too high inside the digester vessel itself. And we talked about energy very briefly, that not only do they make compost at the facility, but they also make energy. Inside here, there's a 12-cylinder motor that compresses the filtered gases, and then roughly enough energy to power 600 homes. All right, in terms of the compost that's produced at the facility, after it's pressed and dewatered, coming out of the digester itself, it goes into the finishing hall, into these bunkers, and it's there for several weeks before it's finally screened and sent to an end user. By the way, I'd also like to point out that there are some air that is piped in underneath these piles through a system. So these do get aerated as they're sitting in these bunkers. And finally, there's some kind of a screening process that has to happen to make sure that any pieces that didn't break down and meet their requirements for the size compost are filtered out. This is called a trommel screen. They've got some other methods also to screen material out. And then this is what the finished compost would look like. All right, so that is our brief tour of the digester facility. Let's make sure everyone has a good idea of what they can actually put in their green cart to send to any compost facility in our county. And I really like how forgiving it is. A lot of people sometimes think that you couldn't put meat or bones into the system, but actually it's set up to accommodate that. So really just about any organic content would work. We don't want liquids going into green carts, no plastics, metals, glass, or things of that nature, but just about anything that comes out of your kitchen that you might have eaten is good for this system. And one thing I like to point out is there are these great stickers that are available at no cost. If your local garbage company doesn't have them for you, IWMA does have them, and they have a UV protective coating on them. You can stick it to your green cart. It's got a QR code on there, so you can go to the IWMA website and get even more information about what organics can go into your green cart. So definitely take advantage of that if you don't have one of these stickers currently. the other thing I wanted to share is that if you need a container to collect food scraps in your kitchen, these pails are available either through your local garbage company or at the IWMA office. Again, there's no cost to these pails. Now, I know a plastic pail may not fit everybody's kitchen motif. So if you need something that's a little more upscale, there are lots of these types of containers available, although these aren't free through IWMA, but still lots of variety of types of containers available to collect kitchen scraps. One of the things that I wanted to point out tonight is that unfortunately, plastic bags, even if they say biodegradable, do not work in our composting systems. However, I know some people like to keep their containers on the inside clean. So if you did want to use a plastic liner, you just make sure that when you empty the container into your green cart, that the plastic liner stays with you and not into the green cart. Another idea that I want to share with you is you could take a piece of newspaper, if you still get a newspaper, and line it in your food pail. That newspaper, of course, is going to absorb liquids from the food scraps that you put in. And the good news is food soiled paper is something that is allowed in the system. So you could then dump the food pail with the newspaper right into the green cart. So that's another way to keep your internal container as clean as possible. All right, so just to kind of summarize, food scraps can now go in your green cart. Please no liquids, paper, or plastics. And with your help, we can turn food scraps into compost and remember some energy. The other thing I did want to mention is a lot of our composters have free compost days. I know at the facility that we just looked at in September, they'll have a free compost Saturday where you can pull up in your car, your truck, your flatbed, whatever you have, trailer, and they'll load it with as much compost as you can carry away. So with that, I want to just say, be smart. Please use your green cart, and thank you for spending part of your evening with us tonight. And I'm going to stop screen share so we can let Evelyn take over and entertain any questions or comments that people might have.
Hello, hello. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. So that was great. Thanks, Mike, for always educating. I feel like every time I watch this, I definitely learn a little bit more and I have a little nugget of knowledge. Now, we have a couple questions. One of them being with 50 to 100 plus new facilities needed across California, will SLO County need additional facilities?
It probably will. And I didn't mention that the digester that we just looked at processes 36,000 tons of material per year. Okay, that's a lot of stuff, but they don't have capacity, I don't think, for too much more. So I was told recently by a reliable source that in North County in Paso Robles, they are looking at building an anaerobic digester up there. So it wouldn't surprise me that if in a few years there was another composting facility. I also want to say that when we first started taking organics and we didn't have the anaerobic digester, we had trucks that were driving from here 107 miles one way to get rid of food waste and green waste, which of course is really bad as far as a carbon footprint and all kinds of other reasons. So of course we don't want to send things far out of our county. So it's terrific that we're building the infrastructure now to keep all of our organics local.
Perfect. And our next question is, who are the end users of that compost? Farmers? How far does the compost go from the facility?
Oh gosh, you know, I was going to preface tonight's comments with I won't know the answer to every question. And here's a good example. I know a lot goes to vineyards that are in the county. What's the furthest that any of that compost goes? I don't know. I also know another compost facility. There's a large one down in Santa Maria. They send a lot of their stuff to Caltrans, which gets used for highway landscaping projects.
Perfect. And unless someone else has a question, those are all our questions for the night. And the person who mentioned if we have this in a different format, this video will be uploaded onto ECOSLO's YouTube channel. Oh, we have one more. Is there any funding to build the new facilities required under SB 1383? Or is it only up to private enterprise?
There are some grants available that are going to be used probably to build lots of the compost facilities, but the grants are not large enough to pay for all of a facility. So no, it's really SB 1383 is in large part an unfunded mandate. And so that's why garbage rates are going up all throughout our county. Well, frankly, all throughout every county in California to help pay for the mandates that are in SB 1383. So no, there's not enough money to 100% pay for all of the digester facilities or compost sites that we'll need.
And another question is, it appeared the material in the digester was wet. Was that before or after the sprinkler section? Meaning, was it made wet at some point?
Oh, yeah. All right. And so they do occasionally inject into the digester vessel something that we call fog, fats, oil, and grease. And that would come from being pumped out from restaurants. And that's a really great thing as far as energy production, because it's the fats, oils, and grease that actually are converted into methane. And so they love fog to go into that. So I would imagine injecting that is what made it look like, I just call it a pea soup consistency in there.
And how will SB 1383 be enforced or regulated?
It's going to be enforced through a local enforcement agency. So far, I don't know who that will be. We've talked about, ideas of maybe county environmental health would enforce it because they go to restaurants anyway. By the way, there are waivers that are available for some businesses in, for example, if they don't have any room for a green cart, or if their production of organics is so small and they have few employees and they don't have a kitchen or something like that. There are businesses that are going to be granted waivers, but eventually they would be getting an NOV, a notice of violation from Cal Recycle, and then potentially cities could be fined if there wasn't a good faith effort to come into compliance. But all the jurisdictions that I know of, which is far from complete in California, are really doing an amazing effort to meet all of the mandates and create all of the infrastructure needed for SB 1383.
For our next question, where will all the new green and food waste go if a county doesn't have a facility like we do?
Well, they're going to have, part of the law makes them do something called capacity planning. And so right now you have to show where your material is going to go, or if you don't have adequate capacity, how you're going to find capacity somewhere else. So it is a challenge, and it may mean that in some cases a jurisdiction is hauling their materials farther than is ideal. As I said earlier, at one point we were doing 107 miles one way just to take materials to the Central Valley to get rid of it before we had adequate capacity.
So the next question is, so any soiled paper, even pizza boxes can be put in the green bin? Question mark.
Yeah, so if it's interesting, if you go to the IWMA website, there's kind of a fun game where you can drag materials and you decide whether it goes in the blue cart, the trash cart, or your organics cart, and then it'll tell you whether you drug it to the right place. And so on that game, it shows a relatively clean pizza box, and if you drag it to the recycling cart, you get a thumbs up, you get some points. Then there's another pizza box that's over half grease all over the bottom. And if you drag that same one to the recycle cart, you get a red thing that comes up that says no. But then if you pull it over to the green cart, it says yes. So I know it's a little bit subjective what food soiled paper is, but typically we only want clean paper going into a recycle cart. And if it's half grease or food material stuck to a piece of paper, it would go in the green cart. For example, a coffee filter would absolutely go into your green cart with the coffee grounds, ideally. I hope that answered that adequately.
I didn't even know that. I didn't know we can put greasy pizza boxes at the bottom. Good to know. See, I learn every time I come to one of these.
Well, that's why the game on the IWM website is kind of fun, and then you learn a lot while you're playing it, and you score points too, so you can play against somebody.
I'm gonna have to give that game a go. Test my knowledge. Next question is, who receives the created energy?
The digester sells it back onto the grid to PG&E, as far as I know. So, and then of course it goes out on the grid. So, I mean, I suppose in theory, anybody in today's program could be receiving some of that energy.
Perfect. And the next question is, and how much energy is created? Sorry if I missed that bit of information.
Yeah, so roughly enough to at maximum, I should say, to power 600 homes.
And are schools participating in this program, and is it or will it become a part of a curriculum starting in elementary school?
Well, IWMA already has a program all about food waste that talks about a lot of the things that we talked about tonight. So we've already been implementing this with elementary school students. It will be required that schools participate and get their organics into the right container. Some could apply for a waiver if they have extenuating circumstances, but schools are included in this legislation.
Perfect. And it looks like currently our last question is, tea bags with a metal staple, are they compostable, or are they able to be placed in the green bin?
Yeah, if you can pull the metal staple off, that would be terrific. If you couldn't, I do drink a lot of tea myself, and I know if they're as small as the ones that I see, they'll mostly be picked up by a magnet somewhere along the process. But absolutely, tea bags can go into your food pail and then your green cart. But yeah, if you can pull the staple off, that's great.
Another person added a question, is the compost good for all growing situations?
Well, that's a tough one to say, all growing situations. I was reading some notes earlier today that indicated that some of the vineyards and farmers that have used the material have been able to increase their yield using the material on their crops. But I'm sure somewhere there maybe is some kind of plant or crop that it's not appropriate for. So I'll hold back from saying all situations. I know on the free compost giveaway, most of the people who take the material are going to, use it for their home garden or planting areas.
And next question is, so who gets the compost, and is it sold to help pay for the process?
Yeah, it is sold, but and it's sold, and I should say, on a wholesale basis. In other words, they don't package it in small little 2 cubic yard or one cubic yard containers. It's just sold by the truckload to commercial growers. They're not really set up for a retail operation at this time.
Perfect. And it looks like that might be our last question. Oh, I lie. There's one more. Okay. Does there need to be more facilities in order to increase the amount of homes it can power? Or, for instance, does it depend on the size of the digester?
Well, if they were processing more organic content with fats, grease, and oil, they'd certainly be producing excuse me, more power. But so if they wind up building one in North County, I suspect we'll have more energy production from that. But to my knowledge, I've thought about this before. I don't think SB 1383 requires a certain level of energy production. But what it does require is something we call procurement, that the materials, the compost being generated, is used locally and certainly not sent to a landfill or just discarded. So you have to find some useful means to use all the material that we're collecting and turning into compost.
And final call to anyone else that has a question. Okay, one last question is this energy production considered green and renewable?
I think it is. I would call it that. They don't use any additional energy. It's carbon neutral according to the owners of the facility. So I would put it in that category.
Perfect. And I keep lying to you all. We have one more here. How long does material stay in the digester to break down?
2 weeks. So it's just in that vessel for about 14 days. I should mention too, which I didn't earlier, is that a fraction of it, maybe up to a third, is piped back into the far end so that we keep those organisms in good supply in the digester vessel. So what comes out, we call digestate. So some of the digestate is put back in to the front end. So there's always a good supply of those organisms to make all of the methane and other biogases created and break everything down.
And with that, I think that ends our program. Now, if anyone else has other questions, feel free to email me. I will be putting my email in the chat. And if I don't know the answer, I know Mike will. So I will refer to him for those answers. Mike, thank you so much. As usual, I can't say this enough. I always learn something new from these programs, no matter how many times I've seen them. And so thank you so much. And thank you for everyone else who have joined us today. And with that, that is our sign off. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you for hosting, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Good night.
Good night.